Hi Joseph, I'm really happy to have you here in Denmark again. And before you arrived this time, I was thinking, wow, it's almost, I think, 14 years now. Our history go back to the first time I met you with the DACO project.
Yep.
And since then I have been playing around with some of your models, especially the satisfaction cycle. And today I really would like to have some more insights around this model, because not only for myself but also a lot of my clients sometimes come and ask, well, where is it from and why this and not that. So the first question which I often get from my own clients is really, for whom is the satisfaction cycle most valuable?
The satisfaction cycle is valuable to a number of people in a number of different ways. And the reason it's valuable is because it's a model. And what that means fundamentally is this. People think of models as though they're instruction sets. Do this, do this, do this, do that. And I don't. And in fact, one of the things that I'll kind of pat myself on the back about, so to speak, is that I'm a particularly good model builder, because my skill set allows me, through training and expertise and practice, to notice patterns. And models are ways of identifying a structure that the pattern exhibits. And then it is the lens that lets you see the pattern more obviously, right? So the satisfaction cycle is a model, and as I've just said, it gives you a lens to notice a pattern that's present. And the pattern that we're talking about here is, how do people make high quality decisions? How do they make decisions that get them outcomes and that also they feel good about after they've gotten the outcome? And the reason that that's really important when we talk about some of the clients you and I both work with, I know that you know sales and leadership and management and some strategy work, these kinds of things. And even in personal change, where we're working with someone as an individual who's in one of those roles, and they need to make something different about their life so that they can be effective in the world, is that they have to take action. The satisfaction cycle, because it observes a pattern through this very positive lens about how people make decisions, keeps them motivated and interested in taking action. And then, as you know, it builds a circle. We call it recursive. It goes around itself, you could say. And the more that you do that, the bigger the motivation, and the easier it becomes to take action. So I think that's probably why it's most valuable. I don't know if I answered where, because I don't think of it that specifically.
So you say that it can be valuable for leaders, for salespeople, for anyone who wants to basically make high quality decisions about what to do next.
Exactly.
Right. So where did you get the idea for this model from? So how did you develop it?
Well, the satisfaction cycle originally started when I began working around NLP, as I know you have an expertise in as well. And the specific expertise that I was looking at that time was this idea of exemplar modeling. So maybe I have to take a step back and just explain that in case anybody who might be listening to us doesn't know. Exemplar modeling is the idea of finding someone who is exemplary at what they do. So not taking 500 people and figuring out what's the basic commonalities about these 500 people and how do 500 people do something, but going, how does the best person in the world that we can find who does this one thing really, really well do what they do? And the exemplars that I was looking at the time were people who were doing change work. And it's not so easy to change somebody's mind. It's not so easy to change somebody's mind so that they take action, as I said. Because for me, the idea of transformational change work isn't you have a new thought or that you feel differently, but that the new thought you have and the feelings that you have lead you to live your life in a different way. Right? So I was originally, as I said, studying NLP, and of course you had guys like Richard Bandler who were out there, and the man that I studied with in particular, Roy Fraser, who were just, I call them geniuses in this art of transformational change. And I was trying to identify how they did what they did so that I could build a model that I could use myself about how to do change work and have a sense of like kind of a movement or a flow. From I have to do this kind of thing first with someone, and then when I get that, I can move on to the second piece. And it began to evolve for me as I watched them work. It seemed to me very evident that they did a couple of things in particular when they were most effective.
And that was my criteria. It wasn't just, these guys were geniuses, and they could make stuff work almost no matter what they did. But trying to isolate those times where I saw them and was able to observe them working at, again, this very high quality level, where their performance was, as I say, exemplary, and noticing what the structure of that exemplary performance was, right? So that was the beginning of how I started working with the satisfaction cycle.
And when did that actually happen in time? So when did you start this evolution or this development?
Well, I began studying NLP in 1986. And I met Roy at the end of that year in 1986 and started working with him, you could say, in some capacity in 1987. So by 1990, I was ready to kind of hang a shingle out and say I was an NLP trainer and somebody who was doing this work. And I had gotten the requisite certification, you know, kinds of things that NLP people do to feel confident, I guess, about doing that kind of work. And having the permission from the official, you know, kind of authority, if you will, the Society of NLP. And so I was beginning then, I would say, to really try to enhance my own way of presenting and delivering training. And a lot of that training was based upon bringing people to the front of a room and sitting with them like we're sitting and doing a demonstration. And there's probably two things motivating me, if I'm sitting here and being totally, you know, open with you. One was that I have a great sense of pride in doing the work I do really well. And also, I didn't want to look like a fool in front of an audience not performing well. So it was that combination, that push-pull, right? First, I wanted to look, you know, good, you could say, or I wanted to perform well, and to deliver what I promised these people who were paying me out in the audience to get training. But I also didn't want someone who knew what they were doing to look at that, let's say, and go, oh, this guy's stumbling and fumbling around. So I began to really think through, when I do these demonstrations, is there a model I can rely on that will more often than not get me a better result?
So that was in early 1990.
And when did this transition into a more specific sales model? Or a sales application?
I think that evolved over time. So, again, going back to my own history, there was the beginning of my sales consulting work in the same around the same time, 1990. And a lot of it was what I thought of as transactional selling. So I was working with really easy to get to clients, you know, the ones that are obvious, car dealers, real estate people, and easy in the sense that they have a sign on the street that says car dealer, real estate person, you know, so I could knock on the door. And our original sales process, myself and another gentleman I was working with, was predicated on knocking on doors, showing up. Hey, you guys got a sales team. Do you need someone who can work with them to make them better at what they do? And fortunately for us, some people started saying yes. And so again, I needed to figure out a way to train them without fumbling around. And I did not have the satisfaction cycle in place at that point. I had the idea of it as a change work model, right? So this demonstration in front of a room, or if I was working with a personal client. But I guess it was kind of rumbling around the back of my own mind. And I had another model that I was using for transactional sales. In 1994, I was approached by someone, actually here in Denmark, who was doing some work with what was then a company called Mercantile, which later became Maersk Logistics, so part of the AP Moller Group.
They're now called Damco, I think.
Right, they were you know, changed and sold again. But the organization at that time was finding themselves in a situation where they were trying to do very high-level conceptual sales. So these were mostly people who had come out of the shipping industry who were selling, you have these boxes, and we need to move them from point A to point B, and you have 10 of them, and it's going to cost this much per box, and it takes this long, and it was very kind of structured transactional sale. Again, now all of a sudden they were selling concept. We can look into your way of moving those boxes, identify where there's what I call friction in the system, where the movement of the boxes is more difficult because of how you're going about doing it. And because of that, we can reduce the cost of doing it. Right? And they had to do that typically for much bigger projects. These were not, you're going to spend a few $1,000s to move some of these boxes. You may be spending millions of dollars to have us come in, look at a system, figure out where it works, how it works, and why it works, and it may take 6 months or a year before we start producing results and getting returns.
Yes.
And in addition, they weren't presenting anymore to a buyer. So I come to you and say, Henrik, you have 10 of these boxes and we need to move them from Panama to Argentina.
Yeah.
It wasn't that anymore. It was a team of people.
Yeah.
The financial person, the internal logistics person for the company, people who were thinking about things like customs going to 5 or 6 different countries and ports, the people who were looking at the issue of what specifically was the product that needed to be moved and multiple kinds of products. So now we maybe had someone who had to sell to a team of 5 or 6 people and coordinate that effort, much higher level conceptual sale. As they began to do that, of course, they found that they had to bring in 4, 5, 6 people. And they needed a structure to organize and create that complex sale. And the gentleman who brought that project to me, wanted to use NLP because he felt NLP was a very strong tool in the sales arsenal.
Yeah.
And I went back to him and said, I think I have something that we could do where we can use NLP as a set of skills, but I can bring in addition a framework about how people make decisions that will make the buying process more structured. And he was very excited by that idea. And so I kind of sat down to the drawing board, so to speak, and began working out the idea of using the satisfaction cycle, which it was around that time I came up with the name, by the way.
Yeah.
And what I did is I had an idea of how to do this movement of leading people to take action. What I didn't know is how that applied to sales.
Yeah.
So I had to go out and find, again, some exemplars in that marketplace. And fortunately, because I was in the selling marketplace already, I knew some people. And that's when I built the model. Around 1994, 95, we really brought it together in a way that was 90% of where it is today.
Yes.
And we've continued to refine it. I mean, I know you've done some work refining it as well.
So again here, so what is we should say the fundamental idea in the satisfaction cycle? So what, if you should go into the center, see what is really the core idea which actually make it valuable in sales?
Well, I'm going to kind of throw that idea back on you, I think. And the reason I'm going to throw that idea back on you is because I think the fundamental idea is the one that you caught on your idea of the green and red.
Okay.
So when you thought about that, when you came up with this idea of there's the red and we have to move to green, what were you thinking?
My thinking was that the more I can, both when I work with a client or in a coaching session, the more I can have the person in an open state of mind, the more they will share, the more information they will share with me, and the more they will actually be able and capable to listen to what I have to offer.
Right.
So for me, it's the foundation of having a good dialogue.
Right.
And when you can have a good dialogue with a client, you're much more likely to actually get the information you need to build a solution which will actually fit them and not my fantasy.
So when you think about the green and red, what is it that you're thinking about doing,
Or what are you noticing that you work with to put them in that positive, good state of mind, as you put it?
I think my focus is first and foremost on myself, even before I meet the client. So for me, it's really important to make sure that I myself, as a salesperson, is okay. Because again, I will influence the client outside their awareness with my state. So that's for me the first point. And then the second is, of course, to open up the meeting by something which the client can respond positively. So build that positive green momentum from the beginning.
Right.
Maybe even from before the beginning.
So I think that's the central point, going back to your question.
Yeah.
And the reason we called the model when we finally built it out, and I was working with a colleague at the time around the sales process, and I was, although I will say that I built the model of the satisfaction cycle, I was using him as a sounding board to test my ideas.
Yeah.
And he was a particularly skillful salesperson. In fact, he's gone on to build a very, very successful sales team in an organization he now runs and owns. The idea was that why not start at the end, so to speak, where we want our clients to be? What we want is we want
you as the client to make a decision. And I want you to feel really good about the decision you've made, so you want to take action on it.
Yeah.
Right? Does that make sense? And when you do that, we use this word that you're satisfied. The interaction you've had with me, you're satisfied with the decision you've made, you're satisfied with the outcomes that you realize, you're satisfied with the momentum or change that creates for you in your life or your business. There's a sense of satisfaction. That's where the word satisfaction cycle comes from, or the title. And what we found as I went out and found these exemplary salespeople is that's what they did. They were able to keep clients in this idea of feeling good about what was happening, even when they were selling them. So it wasn't, when you buy this, you'll feel good. It's, as you're buying this, you'll feel good. When you buy it, you'll feel even better. Get it? So it's like from a positive to an even greater positive. Right? And as you know, that's the center of the beginning of the satisfaction cycle, going from a positive state to an enhanced positive state we call the desired state, or positive plus to desired plus plus, right? Kind of a thing. And that was something that was interesting, that only then, as I began to look for it, began to notice, even with the car salesman I was working with. So for the average person, the idea of buying the car and going to the showroom is not necessarily their favorite way to spend time. They expect it to be somewhat unpleasant, to feel a sense of pressure, and having to deal with a salesman who wants them to do something they don't necessarily want to do. And it's almost antagonistic in the sense that you want me to give you more money than I want to give you, and I want to pay you less money than you want to get. So we're going to kind of fight a little bit. These really good car salesmen wouldn't do that. They would basically start from a question, which is, Mr. Jones, Mr. Wenøe, after you have this car, what is it that you're going to be doing with your family that's going to make you feel really good that you bought it? And they would ask these kinds of strange questions. And frankly, clients weren't used to hearing that. The person in the chair had never had a car salesman who asked them the kind of question of like, after you buy the car, what are you going to be doing with it? Like, I'm going to be driving around. And the salesman was, that I was thinking of, this particular salesman, was kind of very clever in the sense that he would ask a question that followed up and say, well, you already drive around with your family, so it can't just be to drive around. And he said, what's going to be different when you get your new car and you're driving around in it with your family? And the clients would often say things like, well, I'll feel really good because I have a new car. Or, it'll be like my family is more comfortable. And they would give him, in essence, the answers he needed to know how they were thinking about making the decision to buy. And he began to put that into his sales process. Well, that was kind of brilliant, and we call it, naive, in the sense that he didn't know he was doing it, even as he was doing it. So he didn't have the structure. He didn't go, I'm going to follow these 10 steps of selling. It was just, he had figured out how to be with people in a way that led him to feel comfortable at the decision they were making. I was able to figure out how to create a model that allowed other salespeople to organize themselves to be able to do that. Right? And the idea that came out of that was this idea that if you start from being satisfied, you'll get the client to a position where they feel better than they expected to in the sales process. Then they feel good about you, they feel good about themselves, they feel good about the decision they're about to make, and all of the resistance, what we call objections sometimes in sales, in a way just go away. So even when the client has what other salespeople experience as an objection, for you, it just becomes a question. How do we do this? As opposed to, well, what about? And the whole attitude shift makes the experience of selling remarkably different. And the most important thing for me is that it opens the client up in a way that they share information with you that they almost won't give to anyone else. Maybe even information that they themselves didn't know they had or wanted because of their sense of comfort with you.
I think just that is the comment I often get from the people I have trained, is that, wow, I just got so much more information from my meetings when I actually have these questions at hand. So it opened up really for a lot of useful information. So again, the satisfaction cycle is not the only model out there. There's a lot of models, older models, newer models. And so what is it in your mind the satisfaction cycle deliver or bring to the market compared to some of the more well-known models like spin selling, solution selling, value-based selling, challenger sales, and consultative selling?
There's a couple of things.
Yeah.
And, you know, first thing I want to say is that many of these models that are out there
Yeah.
are really high quality models. It's not that they're bad models.
No.
It's that they're missing what you and I have come to think of as an essential quality of truly high quality selling. Right? So when I originally was designing this, and I was going into a sophisticated client who needed a really high quality, high level process, I went and looked at what was out there at the time. So again, we're talking the early 1990s. And some of the big models out there were the spin selling model. Neil Rackham's work was already in place. Solution selling was out there. Consultative selling was out there. So there were models that were in the marketplace that were being used and being sold on large training projects into organizations. One of the things that I looked at very closely was Neil Rackham's spin selling. And one of the reasons was I guess I'm a little bit of a geek when it comes to, you know, scholarship and academic approaches to research. And Rackham's work, you know, covered 25,000 people. I mean, it was a huge amount of work as he began to look at this. And 10,000 people that were very specifically looked at, right? So you have to give it some credibility and say he must have, you know, at least done his homework. Even whether he found the right answer or the wrong answer, he did his homework, right? He went out there and did the work. And what he found was that there was this structure, and the structure fundamentally spin selling was, you know, situation. Where's the client today in their, you know, situation? And from situation, what he really meant was the second step. What's the problem? Right? Spin, SP. So the problem. What is it that prevents the client from getting what they want? And specifically, in the spin selling model, what does that problem cost them? Living with the problem has a cost to the client. What is that cost? That was the salesman's primary role. He said you spend as much as 80% of your time in the sales process, identifying, digging into, discussing, working with the problem.
And the implication or...
Well, that's the I, right? Okay, so now we get to implication. And what he says actually about implication is this. The implication is the actual cost to the client. And when you get there, you cannot spend a lot of time there because it's so uncomfortable for the client to realize if I live with this problem, it costs me $1 million. That's the implication, right? That they'll run away in a way. They shut down. So the implication is important to create in Neil Rackham's model a motivation to move away from the problem, but not something that you want to stay with for longer than you need to because it's uncomfortable, almost painful for the client, and would cause them to reject you. Something we also found out, and I can talk about that if you like. The fourth step is N, right, which is needs. So what do you need to do to relieve the client of the problem that creates the implication and gives them a different outcome? And at that point, the client experiences kind of relief, what you and I would call satisfaction. And I went, why make the client wait and go through pain and suffering to get to satisfaction? So I bought his idea, you could say, that ultimately the idea of a great sales process is you lead the client to satisfaction. Put it at the beginning. So we kind of start almost in the same way that Neil Rackham does with the idea of situation. So we just change it to ask questions about a positive situation. So these guys go in with, when they're dealing with situation and problem, if they're using the spin selling model, they're basically saying what's wrong, what's not working. Right? How does your
what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, that's a great one, right? What keeps you up at night? You know, what's the burning thing? You know, the burning platform, right? That kind of thing. You and I will go in and we'll ask a different question. We'll go, what's working? You know, you guys exist. You have a $32 billion company. You couldn't have made every mistake and no successes. You had some successes, right? What are those? And in a way, again, it's a funny kind of a thing that in NLP we call pattern interrupt, where the client goes, I thought you were here to talk about my problems. You know, and they might not say it, but almost in their mind they have to deal with that. You know, I called you in because we're not making enough money. Why'd you ask me what's working? And I don't think this is all conscious, but I've seen it so many times where it kind of does a double take. And the reason that we ask that question is exactly what you said. This is what you said was the central point that I agree with you about. It's to move them from red which is thinking about problems and what makes them uncomfortable, keeps them up at night,
Yeah.
into a green space, as you put it, which is, what do I feel good about? And what I want is, I want my client to feel good about themselves, their company, their successes, their projects, their people, all these things. Because from there I can ask them the second question, which is essential, which is, okay, if these things are that good, then what do you want that would make it better? Because in a way, we both agree, it's not spoken, that the world isn't yet perfect. As good as it is, we hope it can be better. And the satisfaction cycle leads us into a question of what can be better from a state of feeling really good about the world to begin with. Right? That was very different than, for instance, what spin selling is done. And when I looked at all these other models, whether we're talking about solution selling or consultative selling back then, challenger selling today, almost pick the model, and they all claim to be positively organized and based, and they all talk about problems, solving the client's problems. You and I go in and we use the satisfaction cycle, and we never bring up the client's problem. So we know that where they are today and where they want to be, there's a gap. You know, if we want to use fancy consulting language, a delta, the difference between where they are and where they want to be. And that gap creates a kind of a motivation, a pressure in the system to do that, to have movement, right? By asking the positive question, where are you today if you feel really good about, and from there, where you want to be, what actually happens is where they want to be, you could say, gets higher. So the distance of the gap increases in a positive way, but there's more pull to it now. There's even more motivation in the system.
And maybe they would even be willing to pay more to get further.
Right, because they'll get further. So in a way, I would make this argument, I know that I'm playing with words a little bit, but they won't be paying more because the results are going to be so big that the cost of getting the result is actually less than it would be to pay less to get a smaller result. Right? So
the ROI will be better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's one of the things that I often talk to clients about. You know, I'll go in and frankly, my work as a sales trainer and consultant, somebody who's working in this area, is not inexpensive in the marketplace. I'm at the higher end of the rate scale, you could say. In fact, we probably charge as much or more than some of the major consulting firms that are doing high-level management strategic consulting for sales training, which is, in the industry, insane in a way when you look at the price comparisons. But when the client looks at what they expect to get as a realized return, the ROI, our work becomes inexpensive comparatively. So the big question for me is this: if I'm working with a client, and through any other process of doing sales training, they can move their business from where it is and get 10% or a 20% increase. Let's just make that number. And they're a $100 million business. The 10% increase is a $10 million increase. If I can move them instead of 10%, 12%, just 2% more, that's $12 million. Would you pay me an extra $100,000 to get $2 million more? And that becomes the kind of conversation. And our statistics, our track record, our history shows that we are getting 2%, 4% greater results than our competitors are getting when they bring in those other kinds of sales training models because of two things. Number one, they leave that extra on the table. And number two, some clients are actually turned off by that whole problem-solving approach. And that's the other thing we found when we were looking at traditional sales models, is the client actually rejects the salesperson and the company the salesperson represents because they introduced the problem.
So again here, often when I'm conducting trainings, it's very seldom that people don't buy in to the whole idea, because in a way the satisfaction cycle is so simple that the people basically say, wow, yes, of course, it makes sense. And often I see if I train a group of 16 people, that 4 or 5 of them, they just immediately run out and start to apply it, get huge success. I see a middle group which really needs some management attention to stick to it, and often there's always 1 or 2 who never really gets it.
Right.
How come? How come that even when they see their colleague get such huge success applying it, that they don't in a way give in and start to apply it?
I
think there's a number of factors,
Yeah.
and so let's talk about what makes it simple, right? In a way, we could say the model is as simple as it is,
Yeah.
because we're looking at 5 steps.
Mhm.
There's not 37 things to memorize,
No.
there's not, it is a simple model. It's get a positive start, right?
Mhm.
So, Henrik, what's working? How's this conversation going from your point of view? Pretty well?
Mhm.
There you go, so you get a positive start, and you go, and, given that we're already having a good conversation, we're comfortable with each other,
Yeah.
where do you think we can take it? I mean, what can we do? So I ask a question to amplify that.
Yeah.
Right? Then, once you give me the answer,
Mhm.
then I have a difference. We're here, and you want to be here,
Yeah.
ultimately. All of my next questions are about finding out how do we get from here to here?
Yeah.
What's in place? What do you need to add in? What would you like to be in place? What are your criteria for if you're going to spend money to get there? Whatever it is. And once I get all that data, what we call criteria,
Yeah.
we have the next thing we move to, which is looking at the evidence strategy of a client. We're going to leave that out for a moment and jump to what we call the 4th step. The 4th step is process.
No, the solution.
Excuse me, the 3rd step is process. So we go from positive state
Yeah.
to desired state to
Yeah.
process to solution.
Mhm.
And in the solution
Mhm.
step, we're basically designing
Mhm.
the solution. We're going to go, okay, you said you want this,
Mhm.
you said you want all these things to be there to get it,
Mhm.
and here's how we think we can do that for you.
Yeah.
And if we get it right, which at that point we should, because we're using all their information,
Mhm.
then they should easily be able to go, yes, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And what we want, we kind of talk all the time about the ideal close
Mhm.
in the satisfaction cycle sale, is the client goes, so how do we do that?
Mhm.
And they basically close themselves.
Yeah.
That's the action step.
Yeah.
At the action step, we're actually getting the sale. We have the contract, we have the check, whatever it is. So it's just 5 steps: the present state, desired state, the process, the solution, and the action step.
Yeah.
And as I said, we do something in between process, solution, and action, where we're looking at the ways that clients need evidence
Yeah.
to accept the information we're presenting. And we use their evidence strategies,
Yeah.
not our own.
Mhm.
That's another thing you asked, what makes the satisfaction cycle different,
Mhm.
is we use the client's model,
Yeah.
not our model.
Mhm.
So if I can step backwards for a second,
Yeah.
just to make this clear. These other models that you talk about, and I don't care, by the way, again, if it's spin or solution or challenger, whatever it is, they bring a model into the sales space,
Yeah.
and they go, Mr. Client, Mrs. Client, here's the model we're going to use, and I'm going to put it on you.
Yeah.
And they do it very subtly sometimes and very elegantly, but functionally,
Mhm.
they're running their model on the client.
Mhm.
They use the model, like I said, at the very beginning, how people think of models.
Yeah.
A structured set of steps to follow. And it's an instruction set,
Yeah.
as opposed to a lens.
Mhm.
We really teach people to use the satisfaction cycle as a lens. And in the process of the sale, what happens is they have to really let the client lead. And you talk about this all the time. I mean, you're the champion of the idea of helping the client to buy,
Mhm.
not selling the client.
Yeah.
I think there is where we have our first challenge.
Mhm.
Salespeople think they're supposed to sell.
Yeah.
You help them to change their mind to become more effective by convincing them they should help the client buy. And what you basically said is like, for instance, 5 out of 20 get that.
Yeah.
The other 15 leave the room still thinking they're supposed to sell better.
Mhm.
You're saying to the 5 who get it and heard your message, no, stop selling,
Yeah.
help your client buy better.
Mhm.
So you really have to take the client's point of view, the client's position.
Yeah.
A lot of salespeople aren't willing to do that. They've had success imposing their will on clients,
Mhm.
and they're unwilling to give up their strategies for success.
Yeah.
They've had success because they've used a model that they're comfortable and familiar with, and it's hard for them to be willing to accept the process of going through that change.
Mhm.
I said earlier, change isn't easy.
Mhm.
And the third reason that I think is there is because in the process of making the change,
Mhm.
there's going to be kind of a hiccup
Yeah.
where I know what I'm doing,
Yeah.
I've been doing it for 5 years or 10 years or
Mhm.
whatever it is, and I'm comfortable with it. I now sit down with Henrik, and he spent 2 days or 12 days with me, whatever the training process is, and I learned this new idea. And now I have to go out, and it's going to take me a week or 2 or a month to become as comfortable with it as I was with my old stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge that we have, which is this thing we call cognitive dissonance, right, or discomfort with anything that's unfamiliar. And in addition, and this is the big issue in my mind, despite what I think you hear from your clients, the manager has cognitive dissonance. They are familiar with managing the old model. They're familiar with managing the way that they always did. Now that the person is coming back and they're using these new techniques, these new ideas, and maybe they're not getting instantaneous results. And the manager is going, well, take your time. We can take a couple of weeks and figure out how to make this flow for you or work for you. Instead, they're going, you got to get results, you got to get results, you got to get results. I want you to use the satisfaction cycle, but you got to get results. It's completely oppositional. And so, of course, the salesperson who's in that situation, who's hearing that from the manager, goes, well, I know how to get results. I'll go back to my old way of doing things. And
so the whole system, in a way, push the salesperson back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you and I have found this. We did a major project together where we met each other, right? And within that organization, there was many places that I worked. I worked in multiple countries. We trained in multiple languages, 10 different languages. We were doing a lot of different things within that company. And therefore, I met a lot of different sales managers. And it was incredibly obvious. The ones who bought into the idea that your organization needed a new system and got behind it and supported it and worked as hard at helping their people to incorporate the new system and use it were the ones that succeeded. And we had other managers who just resisted. They resisted either overtly and explicitly by in essence saying, I don't like this new model, I'm not sure it works, I'm not convinced. And of course the salespeople felt that, even if they were told to do something different, they felt the resistance and they moved with the resistance. Or they did it in an overt way, implicitly, where they simply didn't do anything to support it. Which was as bad as fighting it, right? In your organization specifically, you were working with the organization referred to as the Nordic region. Most of your people, if not all of them, because you were driving it, accepted and began using the satisfaction cycle. The results were extraordinary. You were producing lots of results, you were getting increases in sales, you were getting satisfaction from clients, but more importantly in my mind, because of the positive looping effect, your salespeople felt better about what they were doing. And you and I have stayed in touch with, I don't know, half of the sales team that you had, and we hear from them 10, 15 years later, they're still using the satisfaction cycle in other companies and other businesses that they're in. They've gotten promotions and successes as a result, and it works.
I've done training for more or 5 of those organizations because they want me to actually teach their salespeople
the model.
Yeah.
And so, for me, the manager comes in and says to me, why are my people not getting it? Why are they not using it? I first have to satisfy myself in being convinced that they as a manager are doing what they need to do to make it possible for their people to use the model. So that's my first answer. And stepping to the one that I used just before is this idea of cognitive dissonance. Trying something, using something, working with something that's new and unfamiliar. For some people that's more difficult than for others. For some people there's a kind of an excitement in taking a risk and learning new things. And for other people it's just the most painful thing in the world. And both you and I went through school, and I'm sure we had schoolmates who loved school and learning, and other ones who would rather chop off their left arm than to go to school. Almost the same thing, right?
So your advice for the management or the sales management team, what is that? What would be the most useful thing for them to actually specifically do to help the people who need this kind of support?
Well, I'll answer your question and tell you what I think the most useful and specific thing is, and I'll tell you that there's more to it than that. The most useful and specific thing is go through the sales training with your people. That's the most specific and useful thing. When we find that we get management who steps into the room and goes through the experience of learning what this is about and why it works and getting both the theory and the application in place, are able to support the people when they come back to the office in a powerful way. So I like to structure typically a 5-day program. I find that I can cover the material thoroughly. I can introduce not just the satisfaction cycle, but the NLP skills they need to support it, right? So the idea of sensory acuity and recognizing how to read people, the idea of doing things like anchoring and using verbal and nonverbal ways of communicating effectively, all of the things that the NLP model brings and the power of that model.
The probing techniques and so on.
All of those things, rapport, all the things you want to teach. And to do that, and to also thoroughly teach the model, so that they don't have to think about it. It kind of becomes natural and they flow with it. I found takes about a 5-day process.
But that's 5 days in a row, you know.
The way that I like to do
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Or to do 2 days of the first introduction, 2 days of developing skills, another 2 days of, so you can spread out.
Yeah.
But I would say minimally a 5-day concentrated effort, if you want to get both the NLP skills and the satisfaction cycle, is my minimum in my mind.
I run, my format is normally 3 + 2 + 2 to bring them to a level.
Right, you're at 7.
I have 7 days, yeah.
Right. And that's what I'm saying, a minimum.
And what I also normally see is that that's a good start. But if you want to really, then I think some of the clients where have been most successful have come back once a year for another 2 days boot camp, where we bring in clients, bring in cases, and basically not teach them anything more, but just go deeper in what they have already got.
Build confidence, refine their skills, test and challenge what they maybe not be doing perfectly. Absolutely, great way to do it. And I've had clients I've worked with over a course of a year or even 2 in that kind of model. We'll teach it, and then we'll come back every quarter and play with the group in a way to really refine those skills. And think about any professional team. In any athletic endeavor, you don't coach them for a week and then go play for the rest of the season, we're never going to coach you again. How many years do professionals spend in coaching formally as they're already the best in the world? They're still getting coached, right? Salespeople, however, somehow should become perfect in 3 days. It's insane. But let's leave that aside. So the first and most important thing is that the person should go through the training with their people. And as I said, there's this kind of minimum of 5 days that I like to bring to the process, right? What I find sometimes is that the managers will say, well, I understand it's important to show support, so I'll come for the first 2 days. Well, what you just said to your sales team is that this is not important enough for me to give it 5 days, but you go for 5 days, because you're not important enough for it not to be that, I don't get it.
It's like mixed signals.
Right. So already we have conflict, we have resistance. If you really want this to work in your organization, you must get behind it. And the organizations where we found we had the greatest results, I've even had senior managers who are not in the sales process, but are in the general management team, who will sit in that room for those 5 days, sit with their people, experience alongside them, have the conversations at lunch, sit down at dinner, discuss what happened over the course of the day, be excited about it, feel good about what's happening, and then when they get back to the office as a team, that energy, that motivation is still present. When the salesperson is having a challenge, that sales manager or the general manager has the knowledge and the skills to talk about it intelligently. So maybe they're not experts, but 3 minds are going to be better than 1. And as a team, as a group, they can now begin to strategize and do some of what you're calling the boot camp practice for themselves. If the general manager knows a few of the words we use, has a taste for it, but not really, they haven't immersed themselves in it, they haven't soaked in it, then they're going to be uncomfortable. That discomfort is going to shine through again, and the salesperson is going to be uncomfortable because they're uncomfortable. The opposite of the dissatisfaction cycle, right? So that's the most important thing. The second most important thing is to take the structure of learning and actually embed it in the organization. So in the sales meetings, use the satisfaction cycle as the process you use to run your meetings. When you're having one-to-one conversations with your salespeople, use the satisfaction cycle as the way you run that conversation. You must make the process that you're saying you want your salespeople to implement and use. The fundamental process that you use to structure communications, dialogue, process improvement, or
you're sending again that mixed message.
Yeah.
You as a manager must get rid of the mixed messages in your organization. And if you're not confident that you can do that, then arrange with you to go and get training or coaching in how to have that happen.
Yes.
Okay? Can I take a second and talk about something else? It's really interesting that one of the applications we found for the satisfaction cycle, which blows me away in the results it gets, is in the year-end performance conversations.
Appraisal talks.
Appraisal talks, right? Where instead of going, well, you know, Henrik, you did really well, you met this criteria, but I see that you were having trouble here, and well, you didn't actually succeed so well here, but this you did pretty well. And putting you in a position of, you know, so we really have to work on these things and improve them.
Your challenges. Yeah.
And in a way, you know, going back to the little bit that I know about the challenger model, because I'm not overly impressed with it, but the challenger model in a way does that, right? It challenges.
Mm-hmm.
These are the things that aren't working. Let's figure out how we're going to make these better. Let's, you know, when we go into the performance appraisal, we use the satisfaction cycle. We go, so what do you think you did really well this year?
Mm-hmm.
And if, you know, can you show that to me? Can you demonstrate it? You said you did really well. What's the, and they give it. The person you talk to goes, well, I did this, and I met these goals, and I did that other thing, and I had that project that was a success, whatever. Great. So next year, what would you like to do even better?
So when we meet again.
And what do we, as a company, need to get you or help you with so that you can produce that kind of better result next year? The next
Now
time
we
we
talk
meet?
about the process.
Right. And it really, people walk out of performance appraisals, right, feeling great about themselves and excited about the next year, as opposed to like they just got beat up.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by embedding the process in the organization. The more that you do that, the more that those other 15 people of the 20 will begin to see the value, not just in their colleagues getting it. Now it doesn't just become something, oh great, those people are getting success, they can do it, but something that we, as a big organization, do and create success with. And in a way, they almost feel like I have to get on board because that's what we as an organization do. So I think that's my answer to how do you help people to implement it. Become the model of the model.
Yeah. Very good. So when we look at the satisfaction cycle, you said originally you developed it for a project where you needed a model for complex high-level sales. So is there areas where you find that the satisfaction cycle bring more value than other areas, or is there, or let me put it another, are there sales situations where you would not recommend the satisfaction cycle because it's too complex or too heavy? Or
I would recommend that people don't get tied up in the idea that they have to go through it in a formal way.
Yeah.
That I would recommend. There's no situation I can think of where I wouldn't want to be working off a positive bias.
Yeah.
So I would say universally, I want to be in a positive bias.
Yeah.
And I need to kind of make another comment here as well. That doesn't mean I never talk about negatives.
Yeah.
It means I start from and frame things in a positive bias.
Yeah.
Henrik, you and I want to get to an outcome to have a success. Let's talk about some of the things we have that are working for us so we can create success.
Yeah.
And it's okay if in the process of doing that you go, yes, but we've really had a challenge, like you just did, with getting these 15 people who aren't getting the success. What do we do? So I'm happy to talk about negatives in a positive frame in relation to the 5 people who are getting extraordinary success. Because I'm going to get a little geeky for a moment. I think of myself first and foremost as a cognitive scientist. My education, my training, my practice is as a cognitive scientist. And I think about how do people make models of the world that are present for them in the way that they embody them, how they hold them in their own bodies, how they look out into the world and see through the model the way the world is, and then how they decide to take action based on those models. Right? And what we know is that from this positive bias, people will look out into the world and see opportunity versus threat. They'll see what's possible first. As they become more skillful, and if we go back to the other question you asked, when they install this kind of process into the organization, and we have ways of helping them to practice how to do this well, they don't only see opportunity, They also see the threats to that opportunity, but they see them in the right sequence and with the right weight.
Yes.
They balance them. That you'll get further than you will from the positive point
Yeah.
than you can from the negative, what we call the inhibitory.
Yes.
Because the system remains open. And we mean that literally at a neurological level. So we're working in a very sophisticated neurological model without using fancy neurological terms.
Yeah.
We don't have to go in and teach people about the names of the brain structures or how many neurons are firing or what happens at the neurochemical level. All of that's true.
Yeah.
And I think about that as I'm building models, but we make the models simple for people who have no training or no experience in those areas of science and don't need to.
Yes.
Right? So the thing that I would say is you want to keep things simple. So always bring in the positive bias. Start your clients, start your conversations, go home and interact with your husband, your wife, or your children from a positive point of view to the very best of your ability.
Yeah.
But you don't need in every situation to go, what's happening that works? What would make it better? Let's walk through everything that you need to have. It may be a simple conversation, you know. You know, Henrik, remember I came last time, we had that great lunch. You know, I'd love to go out for lunch with you again. Where would you like to go?
Yeah.
I've just done positive and desired state in whatever it was, 15 words. I don't know, I didn't count them, but you get the idea.
So you say that you can be more or less, you can go in more or less details depending on what is the actually buying, selling situation
Right.
which is in front of you.
When I'm doing training, I mean, you've heard me say, you know, if I were a person in a candy shop selling a chocolate bar,
Yeah.
I wouldn't use the satisfaction cycle. Somebody comes in and says, hey, you know, Joseph, I'd like to buy this bar of chocolate. I go, great, it's 37 cents or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
buy the chocolate. I don't need to go through the process. If I have someone who is able to move quickly through the process with me,
Yeah.
I let them. I don't have to make sure I, you know, have a list of questions and I have to ask everyone, you know. One of the funny stories I tell, and you've heard me tell, is about the man, you know, the group, it was two gentlemen actually, who were selling to a client, and they had this 75 slide show, actually 78 slides. And
At the warehouse.
at the warehouse. You know, and they just had to go through every slide. Let the client lead.
Yeah.
So where it doesn't work is when the situation is simple enough that you don't have to make it into a formal process, and where the client is moving maybe faster than you are, and is ready to take action before you're there,
Yeah.
take their lead.
Don't bring them back.
Right.
Yes.
Right, exactly.
So again here, another area where I think really what we do is not the same, or maybe I would even say different, is some of the learning principles we are using when we teach people about this model and the tools. I would like you to just talk a little into that. So what's your, where do you see that we differentiate, and why, in your mind, does that bring value for our clients?
The biggest learning principle is what we call whole form learning.
Yeah.
That's the biggie, right?
Yeah.
And what we mean by whole form learning is we're not teaching the model typically in steps.
Yeah.
So we first actually have people experience the model. We teach it in whole form. We use the model to teach the model.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way to say it. And as we're doing that, people start having an experience. And they begin to wonder about why they're having the experience. And they begin to ask questions and get excited about what's going on.
Yeah.
And then we explain it.
Yeah.
So the biggest challenge or change to traditional learning models and the ones we use is changing the direction. So rather than going from here are the steps that you need to understand so you can do this, we're basically saying, let's do this.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's look at what we've done. Here's the steps we just did. And it almost feels backwards.
Yeah.
The other thing is that we really want to be very experiential or participative and minimize the amount of lecturing. So we use a lot of experiential exercises. And they're very particular in this way. When you and I train, I know that we both use as real world scenarios as we can. So rather than say, let's do a role play, you're going to be a diamond salesman and blah, 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 blah. We'll go, let's use something that's really happening, right? So go and find out what Jim wants from being here in the training today.
Yeah.
Now there's no role playing.
Nope.
Jim is Jim. Jim's at a training, and he's there hopefully to get something from it.
Yeah.
And the elicitation we're doing, the gathering of information, the probing and all that, is based upon what Jim's really experiencing.
Yeah.
So we get real world, real emotional, real strategic responses.
Yeah.
And that gives the quality to the salesperson and the person experiencing the training, the idea of what it will be like when they're with a real client having a real conversation. I would say one of the biggest comments I get that causes me to kind of chuckle and I get tickled by is, well, Joseph, will this work in the real world? And I always tell my clients, listen, I'm in this room and this is what I do for a living. This is my real world. So is it working? If it's working in this room, which is for me my real world, why would that question even be relevant?
Yeah.
And therefore, the learning principle we use is we make the training real world. We put it into real context. Okay? Another thing that we do is we're using a certain kind of repetition, which is recursive repetition. So we teach something, and then we go back and we teach it again, but now we build in the higher level skills. So it's kind of like the circle gets a little bigger. And then we'll go through it a third time, but we're at an outer edge of the circle, and we don't go get everything there is to get about this glass of water. We go, let's get one thing about it, it's a glass. Then we go back to it, and it has water in it. Then we go back to it and go, and the water's cold, you can see the condensation. And we keep building and layering, so it gets in the person's, as we say, skin and bones. That's another part of our learning process.
That's what we also now call learning by being.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I have moved through, learning by
doing or
well, learning by doing is kind of a step forward.
Yeah.
The original learning is learning by hearing or seeing, right?
so monkey see, monkey do.
Monkey see, monkey do learning, right? The teacher at the front of the room with the blackboard,
Yeah.
right? The professor lecturing to the class,
Yeah.
right? And you take notes. There's a second way of learning which is much better, this experiential thing of go and do it.
So learning by doing.
Right. And that's really useful. We use that a lot. A third and higher level of, a third order, we could call it, of learning, is where you're actually becoming what it is you're doing. And without knowing you're doing it, you're already doing it. Mr. Miyagi,
Yeah.
right? Wax on, wax off. And you don't know that you're learning the block.
Yeah.
You don't know that you're learning, this block, but you're doing it, and it's in you.
Yeah.
It's become part of you.
Yeah.
We build that into our training process.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes it's even frustrating for people because they don't feel like they're learning, because they can't identify that they're learning.
Yeah.
It's so subtle, it's so kind of under the covers that they only realize that they've learned when we challenge them.
Yeah.
And we point out, how did you just do what you did? And what do you mean? You just did blah, 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 blah. Did you recognize you? They go, yeah. How did I do that? And they go, you tell me. And we really work with it. Now we extract it.
Yeah.
Now we get the knowledge here, but first we want it here.
Yeah. I often get that feedback on the third day when I actually challenge people on how much non-verbal communication they're capable to pick up. They often say, wait, I think 4 days ago I wouldn't even know that I didn't know. But now I'm actually noticing what the person is doing, not only what they're talking about. And they're in a way amazed about themselves.
Right.
But they were not really aware of it before I posed that question.
And when you do that,
Yeah.
do you, in the first 2 days, let's say, 'cause you're saying it's like the third day, my guess is you're pointing out what to notice.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, what you're saying is that they don't notice that they're noticing.
In a way, it's just in a way building up step by step by step to the point where they suddenly cannot not notice.
Right.
But they then didn't realize how far they actually got in those 3 days before I actually stopped them and said, okay, so where are you actually now compared to before you entered this training?
Right.
And in a way, there they are positively shocked.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's again this layering or this building up, as you put it.
Because they will not get it in 5 minutes, because the idea they get in 2 minutes. But the skill set, it really takes something to to be in the room in a way that you actually get this information.
I think that what we do
Yeah.
that's unique, you and I and the people who work with us and are trained, by us and alongside us, is we're actually training people to change their neurology, not just their thoughts, but the actual system. Like their eyes become different. You could say they've trained the sensitivity of seeing something differently than they were able to see it before they work with us.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's part of it too?
I think that's why I decided to actually name my company Acuity World, because I think really that's the core of what we do, whatever we do. It's basically bring people into the world in a way that will actually be able to connect to the world, not only to their own inner representation or their own illusions.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
So really, it connects them to the world.
Yeah. And I think that's also maybe one of the big challenges for a lot of salespeople is that they have to get out of their own head into the real world where they have a chance to actually connect to the world of the client, the mind of the client.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that maybe is again a very simple idea, but a lot of people, in my experience, have spent too many years getting lost in their own ideas,
Right.
in their own mind. And it's a simple idea, but for a lot of people, it's a big change.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's a huge change. Huge.
Yeah.
To get geeky again for
Yeah.
a second, what you're talking about when you say, I name my company Acuity World because I think that's the core skill.
Yeah.
These are really what I think of as meta skills.
Mhm.
So they're a body of skills that are not specific to the satisfaction cycle model or any model, NLP, but when you get these skills, you begin to use them in your life.
Yeah.
You begin to find ways
Yeah.
to mix them up and do things with them that you were never taught.
Yeah.
And that to me is exciting because now we kind of have learning that creates learning that we never taught.
So again, that brings me to one of the last questions really, so that the satisfaction cycle, when we formally teach it, is mostly to salespeople and leaders. Where else do you see people can apply this in their life? I know you have touched upon it a little, but
To me, the reason I think we talk about sales and leadership applications is because we get a lot of requests from the clients that we work with, business, professional clients for that. And I think that when they hire us to do the sales and leadership training, they want the result that they are hiring us for, that they pay for in essence. What they're most pleased about is all the other results that they get alongside that can't help but happening.
Yeah.
Right now I'm spending a lot of time and energy in thinking about how to train people to become really skillful and proficient in these skills.
Yeah.
And to use them in many ways, in the sales and leadership, but also I have a lot of clients that I work with and I'm very interested in working with that are consultants, that are coaches, that are therapists, even people who are professional teachers in classrooms. And how do you use, especially what I'm calling the package of meta skills, in whatever model you have, whatever model you use, to become more effective. So that's an application right there, is how do you do what I call professional change work? How do you help people move from point A to point B and do something different to increase the quality and level of their performance? Whether you're, again, consultant, you're a coach or a teacher, whatever it might be. And the other area where I find that there's tremendous value in the model and in the skills that surround the model is in our personal relationships. Relationships that are intimate with partners, spouses, relationships with our children, relationships with our parents, relationships with friends. And being able to, as you put it, be out there in the world and connect with the world. If I want to maintain the friendship we have, I have to pay attention to your experience in the world. If every time we get together, all you experience is me imposing myself on you, at some point that has to get old. Right? And it's also, frankly, not as much fun for me. What makes it interesting to have a relationship is to have a relationship, not to have a relationship with a mirror or a brick wall. Right? So I think some of the most powerful places in my life where this works, and I've had it come back to me from people I've worked with and introduced it to as well, is in the ability to build higher quality relationships and
in a way, bring more love into their life, bring more happiness into their life, and to share that with other people.
Okay. So I think that's a good start.
It's a great start.
So I would like to say thank you for taking the time to do this interview with us while you're here in Denmark, and I look forward to put it up so that people can get the inspiration and apply it in their work to get the success that we want.
Yeah,
So
it'll be
thank you
interesting.
very
So
much.
I really thank you for giving us a chance to get the word out there and to see what people think about what we've had to say.
Okay.
Cheers, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay.